Imagine a paradise where angels have no wings and God does not sit on a throne. A heaven without the fluffy white clouds or the shimmering pearly gates we often see in Western paintings. Instead, it is a vast land with endless green fields, where human souls are free to wander and explore the wonders of creation. You might be wondering, how can there be such a different kind of paradise? But that is exactly what is described in the ancient Ethiopian Bible, a unique version of the Bible that few people know about. Interestingly, this is not a random interpretation or a misunderstanding of the text. It is the result of thousands of years of independent cultural and spiritual development by one of the world's oldest Christian communities. Did you know that Ethiopia is the only African nation that was never fully colonized? This allowed them to preserve and develop a completely unique version of Christianity, shaped by their rich cultural heritage. While the West paints a picture of heaven with familiar images like clouds, winged angels, and pearly gates, Ethiopians have a completely different vision, one that can challenge and expand our understanding of paradise. But the question arises, why is there such a significant difference? And more importantly, what does this say about the diverse nature of faith and human understanding of the spiritual world? In today's journey of exploration, we will delve into these remarkable differences. We will learn not only about the content of these descriptions, but also about the historical, cultural, and spiritual origins that shaped them. And perhaps through this, we will learn a profound lesson about how the same faith can be expressed in many different ways, each with its own beauty and meaning. To understand the uniqueness of the Ethiopian perspective on heaven, we need to go back to the 4th century AD, when Christianity was officially recognized as the state religion of the Kingdom of Aksum, the precursor to modern-day Ethiopia. But the story actually begins much earlier. According to the tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, their connection to Judaism and Christianity originates from the legendary meeting between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's sacred epic, tells that from this meeting, a new royal lineage was established, linking Ethiopia to ancient Israel. This explains why many Jewish elements are still preserved in Ethiopian Christianity to this day. The Ethiopian Bible, written in the ancient Ge'ez language, is one of the most unique Bibles in the world. It includes 81 books, significantly more than the 66 books in the Protestant Bible or the 73 books in the Catholic Bible, and contains books not found in any other version, such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. But what makes the Ethiopian Bible special is not just the number of books. The interpretation and understanding of spiritual concepts within it are also entirely different. For example, while the West often depicts angels with white wings and halos, the Ethiopian Bible emphasizes their spiritual nature without attaching them to any specific form. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian churches in the world, developed independently from Rome and Constantinople for much of its history. This allowed them to maintain unique traditions and develop a distinct theological system. They still observe many ancient rituals, including adherence to Jewish dietary laws and the practice of circumcision. A notable point is how the Ethiopian Orthodox Church incorporates indigenous cultural elements into the Christian faith. Instead of imposing a Western model, they created a unique synthesis between Christianity and Ethiopian cultural heritage. This is vividly reflected in religious art, church architecture, and especially in their vision of heaven. You might wonder, how could such a unique version of Christianity survive and thrive? The answer lies in Ethiopia's unique geographical position. Surrounded by high mountains and harsh deserts, Ethiopia has maintained its cultural and religious independence for centuries, even as the rest of Africa gradually came under external influences. This independence, along with the preservation of ancient texts and oral history traditions, has allowed Ethiopia to develop and maintain a unique understanding of heaven, one that deeply reflects both their cultural heritage and spiritual identity. When placing the Ethiopian Bible alongside Western versions, the differences in the concept of heaven become clear and thought-provoking. Let's explore 3 of the most striking differences, which may surprise and provoke reflection in many. First, while the West often describes heaven as a kingdom in the clouds with pearly gates and streets of gold, the Ethiopian Bible paints a picture of a vast land, more connected to nature. In Gaia's texts, heaven is described as an open space where the boundaries between the spiritual and natural worlds become blurred. But why is there this difference? Second, the role of angels in Ethiopian heaven is entirely different. Instead of winged creatures in white robes as in Western art, angels in Ethiopian belief are described as pure spiritual presences, not limited by physical form. They are seen more as spiritual energies than beings with specific shapes. This raises questions about how we envision spiritual entities. Third, and perhaps most surprisingly, is how the Ethiopian Bible describes the relationship between humans and the divine in heaven. While the West often emphasizes the image of God on a throne with a clear separation between creator and creation, the Ethiopian perspective shows a much closer and more direct relationship. These differences raise an important question. Are we seeing 2 completely different versions of the same heaven, or are these 2 different understandings of the same spiritual truth? The answer is likely more complex than we think. Scholars have proposed various theories to explain these differences. Some suggest it is the result of a blend between Christianity and ancient indigenous Ethiopian beliefs. Others argue that it is the result of Ethiopia maintaining original understandings of Christianity, unaffected by the Latinization process, as in the West. But perhaps the most important thing to consider is the role of culture in shaping our spiritual understandings. How can the same faith be interpreted so differently in different cultures? And what does this say about the true nature of heaven? As we continue to delve into this topic, these questions will guide our exploration, because perhaps, in understanding these differences, we not only learn about the Ethiopian Bible, but also about the very nature of faith and how humans understand the spiritual world. The first striking concept is the 7 heavens, a complex and meaningful cosmic structure. Unlike the simple notion of a single heaven, ancient Ethiopians believed in 7 different realms of heaven, each with its own meaning and purpose. The first heaven, called Sakai, is described as a transitional space where souls newly departed from the earthly realm begin their spiritual journey. In Gaia's texts, this realm is depicted with lush gardens and clear rivers, reminiscent of the earthly beauty of Ethiopia. Interestingly, according to scholars, this may reflect the Ethiopian highlands geography into the spiritual world. The second heaven, Kayama, is where the purification of the soul takes place. Unlike the concept of purgatory in Catholicism, this is not a place of pain and punishment, but a space for self-awareness and spiritual transformation. Ancient texts describe this place with gentle light and fresh air, where souls are guided by spiritual presences, not winged angels as in Western belief, but spiritual guides. The third heaven, Ma'alt, is considered the repository of cosmic knowledge. According to the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, one of the unique texts only found in the Ethiopian Bible, this is where all the secrets of creation are held. Souls here gain access to knowledge about the universe, past and future. It's fascinating to compare this with the concept of the Book of Life in the Western Bible. While the West focuses on recording human actions, the Ethiopian version emphasizes sharing cosmic knowledge. The fourth heaven, Berhan, is the realm of pure light. But not physical light as we usually understand, it is the light of spiritual understanding. Gaia's texts describe this place as having no darkness, not in the literal sense, but as having no ambiguity or confusion in perception. This reflects Ethiopia's unique view of the relationship between light and spiritual knowledge. The fifth heaven, Mekdes, is considered the holy place, where souls achieve perfect harmony with the Creator's will. Notably, in the description of this realm, there is no distinction between the worshipper and the worshipped as in Western belief. Instead, it is a state of perfect spiritual union. The sixth heaven, Zabel, is the realm of cosmic music, but not the hymns we usually imagine. Ethiopian texts describe this as the place of the sound of creation, the primordial vibration of the universe. This is reminiscent of modern studies on string theory and quantum physics, showing the sophistication in the ancient Ethiopian concept. Finally, the seventh heaven, Arafit, is considered the highest realm of heaven. But unlike the image of thrones and palaces in Western belief, this realm is described as a state of pure existence, where the boundaries between human and divine, between creation and creator, become blurred. This concept is quite close to the notions of nirvana in Buddhism, showing interesting similarities between different spiritual traditions. A special point in the description of these heavens is the absence of material elements like gold and jewels, things often present in Western depictions of heaven. Instead, the focus is on spiritual states and the development of consciousness. This reflects a profound view of the nature of happiness and spiritual fulfillment. In Gaia's texts, there are also detailed descriptions of how souls move between the heavens. There is no concept of wings or flying as in Western belief. Instead, movement is described as a process of transitioning states of consciousness. This is reminiscent of modern concepts of space-time and different dimensions. Another unique aspect is the role of time in Ethiopian heavens. Unlike the notion of an eternal heaven in a linear sense in the West, the heavens in the Ethiopian Bible are described as existing in a different form of time, a circular or spiral time, where past, present, and future intertwine. Particularly interesting is how the Ethiopian Bible describes the relationship between souls in heaven. There is no strict hierarchy or ranking as in Western belief. Instead, souls are described as points of light in a complex network of interactions, each point having its own role and contribution to the overall harmony. In terms of language, Gaia's texts use many metaphors and symbols drawn from Ethiopian nature to describe heaven. For example, instead of streets of gold, they speak of paths of light. Instead of thrones, they describe centers of understanding. This shows a closer approach to nature and the lived reality of Ethiopians. Another notable point is the concept of boundaries in Ethiopian heavens. There are no specific walls or gates as in Western descriptions. Instead, boundaries are defined by the level of awareness and spiritual development of each soul. This suggests a progressive view of spiritual development as a continuous process rather than sudden leaps. In ancient texts, there are also descriptions of the sound of heaven, not the singing of angels as in Western belief, but a subtle vibration considered the primordial sound of creation. Modern scholars have compared this to discoveries in modern physics about gravitational waves and the vibration of fundamental particles. Finally, one of the most unique aspects of Ethiopian heaven is the concept of returning. Instead of a final destination, heaven is seen as a cyclical journey of consciousness, where each soul ultimately returns to its divine origin, but at a higher level of understanding. This reflects a profound view of the purpose of spiritual existence. To truly understand the unique differences in how Ethiopians perceive heaven, we need to place it within the broader cultural context of this land. Imagine standing on the Ethiopian highlands, where the air is thin and clear, where the boundary between sky and earth seems blurred in the morning mist. This unique geographical setting has contributed to shaping how Ethiopians perceive the spiritual world. Ethiopia is not just a nation, it is an ancient civilization with a history spanning thousands of years. Before Christianity arrived here, Ethiopians had a complex belief system, where the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds was not as clear as in Western thought. This explains why in their concept of heaven, natural and spiritual elements intertwine naturally. One of the most significant cultural influences on Ethiopia's concept of heaven comes from its historical connection with ancient Israel. According to the tradition recorded in the Kebra Nagast, the Ethiopian royal family is a direct descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This is not just a historical story, it is the foundation for a unique system of beliefs and religious practices. In Ethiopian culture, the concept of time is significantly different from the West. Instead of a linear concept of time, Ethiopians tend to view time cyclically, where past, present, and future intertwine. This is clearly reflected in how they describe heaven, not as a final destination, but as a continuous state of becoming and transformation. Ancient Ethiopian art also plays a crucial role in shaping the concept of heaven. The murals in the ancient rock churches of Lalibela are not just works of art, they are windows into the spiritual world. In these paintings, space and time are bent, holy figures are depicted not according to conventional perspective rules, reflecting a non-material view of reality. Another important cultural aspect is the role of community in Ethiopian society. Unlike the individualism of the West, Ethiopian culture emphasizes community and the interconnectedness of individuals. This is reflected in their concept of heaven, not as a place of individual salvation but as a collective harmony. The Ge'ez language, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, also plays a crucial role in shaping the concept of heaven. The structure and vocabulary of Ge'ez allow for the expression of abstract, spiritual concepts in a way that Western languages cannot easily match. For example, in Ge'ez, there are specific words to describe spiritual states that have no exact equivalent in English or other European languages. The climate and geography of Ethiopia also deeply influence how they envision heaven. In a country with towering highlands and deep valleys, the boundary between sky and earth is always blurred. This is reflected in their concept of heaven, not as a distant place in the clouds, but as a parallel reality, close and tangible. Ethiopia's oral history tradition also contributes to a unique understanding of heaven. Over generations, stories about the spiritual world are passed down orally, enriched by the experiences and insights of each generation. This creates a picture of heaven that is always evolving and changing, not rigid like in written texts. Another important cultural factor is the relationship of Ethiopians with nature. In traditional culture, nature is not something to be conquered or controlled, but a part of spiritual reality. This explains why in their concept of heaven, natural elements play a central role rather than being subordinate. The traditional educational system of Ethiopian monasteries also contributes to the understanding of heaven. In these schools, students not only learn about sacred texts but are also trained in astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. This leads to a holistic approach to spiritual reality, combining both science and faith. Finally, we cannot overlook the influence of Ethiopia's unique political history. As the only African nation never fully colonized, Ethiopia has maintained its independence in cultural and religious development. This has allowed them to develop and maintain an understanding of heaven that is not heavily influenced by Western concepts. All these cultural factors intertwine, creating a complex and multidimensional picture of heaven. A heaven deeply marked by the land and people of Ethiopia. This is not merely another version of Western heaven, but a completely unique understanding of spiritual reality, shaped by thousands of years of history and culture. As we delve into the theological implications of the concept of heaven in the Ethiopian Bible, we face a fundamental question. Are these differences merely a matter of cultural interpretation, or do they reflect a deep and unique theological understanding of the nature of spiritual reality? Modern theological scholars have pointed out that Ethiopia's concept of heaven is non-dualistic, meaning it does not create a clear division between the material and spiritual worlds, as in Western theology. This is not a deviation from Christian orthodoxy, but may actually be closer to the views of the early church. One of the most important theological implications lies in how the Ethiopian Bible understands the relationship between the Creator and creation. Instead of the strict hierarchical model of the West, Ethiopian theology proposes a model of co-presence, where divinity is manifested in every aspect of creation, not just limited to the heavenly realm. The concept of salvation in Ethiopian theology is also revolutionary. Instead of emphasizing individual salvation as in Western tradition, the Ethiopian Bible views salvation as a collective process where all of creation moves towards perfection. This is reminiscent of Origen's concept of apopatastasis, the belief that ultimately all creation will be reconciled with the Creator. A particularly interesting point is how the Ethiopian Bible addresses the issue of time in heaven. While Western theology often describes heaven as a timeless, static state, the Ethiopian perspective suggests a different form of time, not the absence of time, but a transformed time, where development and transformation continue. Modern theologians are particularly interested in how the Ethiopian Bible addresses the issue of the body in heaven. Unlike the Western tendency to dematerialize, Ethiopian theology proposes a stronger incarnational view, where the body is not abandoned but transformed and elevated. This leads to another important theological implication about the nature of joy in heaven. Instead of purely spiritual joy, the Ethiopian Bible suggests a more holistic experience, including both material and spiritual elements. This reflects a deeper theology of joy, closer to the comprehensive human experience. The view of the role of angels in the Ethiopian Bible also carries deep theological implications. Instead of seeing angels as separate beings, they are understood as modes of divine presence, ways in which divinity is manifested in the universe. This is reminiscent of the concepts of divine energies in Eastern theology. One of the most significant contributions of Ethiopian theology is how they address the relationship between justice and mercy in heaven. Instead of viewing these as opposing principles, the Ethiopian Bible proposes a unique synthesis, where justice and mercy are seen as two aspects of the same divine reality. Scholars also point out that the concept of heaven in the Ethiopian Bible has important implications for ecological theology. By not creating a division between nature and grace, Ethiopian theology provides a solid foundation for developing a comprehensive environmental theology. Finally, these theological implications are not just academic matters. They have profound practical significance for the life of faith. They suggest a more holistic approach to spirituality, an understanding of heaven not just as a distant destination, but as a reality that can be experienced and lived in the present. These discoveries raise important questions for contemporary theology. Is it time for us to expand our understanding of heaven? And more importantly, how can these insights help us live a richer and more meaningful life of faith in the modern world? As we reach the conclusion of this exploration, it is important to synthesize and understand the deep significance of the differences in the concept of heaven between the Ethiopian Bible and the West. These differences are not just interesting theological points, but offer valuable lessons on how we understand and experience faith in the modern world. First, let's summarize the main reasons for these differences. We have seen that Ethiopia's geography, history, and culture have played a crucial role in shaping their view of heaven. But more importantly, These differences demonstrate the ability of the Christian faith to adapt and develop in different cultural contexts without losing its core essence. One of the most important insights we can draw is the value of having multiple understandings of heaven. In our increasingly diverse and connected world, recognizing and respecting different understandings of spiritual reality becomes more important than ever. Ethiopia's view of a heaven without rigid boundaries between material and spiritual can help us overcome unnecessary divisions in the life of faith. For modern believers, these insights offer practical significance. First, they invite us to expand our vision of heaven, not just as a distant place we hope to reach after death, but as a reality that can be experienced and lived in the present. Ethiopia's concept of the interweaving of heaven and earth can help us live a richer and more meaningful spiritual life. Second, Ethiopia's holistic approach to body and spirit can help us overcome the tendency to separate spiritual life from daily life. Instead of viewing spirituality as a separate domain, we can learn to integrate it into every aspect of life. Another important lesson comes from how the Ethiopian Bible emphasizes community in heaven. In an age of extreme individualism, this reminds us that the spiritual journey is not a solitary one, but a shared experience with the community. For those interested in interfaith dialogue, Ethiopia's perspective provides a useful model. Their integration of elements from Judaism and indigenous culture into Christian understanding shows the potential for meaningful cultural religious dialogue and synthesis. Looking to the future, these insights can contribute to developing a theology suitable for the 21st century. In the context of global challenges such as environmental crises and social fragmentation, Ethiopia's holistic approach to the relationship between nature, humanity, and divinity can provide valuable insights. This leads us to the question of the modernity of these ancient perspectives. It may be surprising to see that many aspects of Ethiopia's view of heaven reflect trends in modern thought, from quantum physics to ecology. This suggests that sometimes to move forward, we need to look back at ancient understandings. For those who want to delve deeper, there are many reliable resources on this topic. Modern Ethiopian scholars are working to make these insights accessible to a global audience. Research centers on Ethiopian Christianity are also developing worldwide. As we conclude this exploration, remember that the goal is not to decide which version of heaven is correct, but to understand that spiritual truth is often richer and more diverse than we imagine. Ethiopia's view of heaven reminds us that sometimes the deepest insights into spiritual reality come from places we least expect. So what does this mean for us today? Perhaps it is an invitation to expand our vision of heaven and the very nature of faith. Perhaps it is a reminder that in the spiritual journey, sometimes the roads less traveled lead to the most valuable discoveries. As we return to the initial question about a heaven without winged angels, perhaps now we can see that it is not a different heaven, but a different perspective on the same profound spiritual reality. And in that difference, we find not contradiction, but the richness of human faith. Let these insights be not just knowledge in the mind, but a source of inspiration for how we live and experience our faith. Because ultimately, the true value of understanding heaven lies not in what we know about it, but in how those understandings change the way we live in the present.